Hey, I'm Mark Rothman, Progress Coach. In this video, I want to talk about context. Now, context is the framework or story that we use to narrate our lives. All of us have an internal context, an internal story that we're telling ourselves. There are a lot of different ones that we use in different settings. At a party, we may have one context. At work, we may have another. But there's one inner story or a couple of inner stories that we keep coming back to over and over and over. And for too many of us, too often, those inner stories are not the best stories about ourselves. They're often really the worst stories about ourselves, let's be honest. And when we bring those stories forward, when we live in those contexts, we're almost intentionally limiting our progress. We're limiting our ability to move forward. And that's one of the biggest obstacles to really living the kind of life we want to live. But if we can change that context, we can change everything. Let me give you the example of David and Goliath. We all know the biblical story. David was a little boy shepherd who was great with a slingshot, and none of the other soldiers wanted to battle this giant Goliath. And so David went up and said, "I'll fight him." The soldiers were terrified. Goliath was this huge, hulking man, full of chainmail and buckles and swords, and David had nothing but his slingshot. But David saw an opportunity the other soldiers didn't. David had a different context. David's context was not Goliath's context. It was not, I'm going to fight Goliath on Goliath's terms. I'm going to fight him on my terms. The other soldiers couldn't get that context. They couldn't get out of the context they were living in. So David swings his slingshot and, sure enough, throws a stone through the visor, hitting the monster right in the middle of his forehead. And he wins the battle. Now, one of the most important things about that story is not just that David had a different context than the other soldiers, but that David knew what his strengths were. He wasn't letting the existing context blind him. He wasn't telling an inner story of, oh, I'm so small, I don't have the skill of these other warriors, I'm not like them. It was, what do I have available and what can I use in this situation? All of us have those skills. Let me give you an example. If you see yourself as somebody who starts a lot of projects and never finishes them, you probably have an inner context of, I don't follow through, I am too confused, I can't focus, I move from thing to thing to thing. Am I hitting a couple of chords here? Well, that doesn't have to be your context. You can also look at it and say, I have a really active mind. I have a very fertile imagination. I'm actually very creative. I like doing a lot of different things. Now your context is one of strength, and you can say, okay, maybe I need to dial back starting project after project. Maybe I need to limit it to some number. Maybe I have to experiment with being focused and just following through on one or two things and see where that takes me. But if you start with a context of what you can do and what you're capable of, rather than a context of what you can't do, you can be your own David. You can kill your own Goliath. And that's really how we can move forward in our lives.